Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Urbana-Champaign. My name is Reverend Sally Fritchie, and I am the Associate Minister of this church. I'm so glad to be here with you, streaming live from the sanctuary on Green Street this morning. Our congregation's mission is to build community, seek inspiration, promote justice, and find peace. We are a church of many theologies that believes in deeds before creeds, a church that strives to build beloved community in the here and now. You may be joining us today from across the world or from just down the street. Wherever you are, please know that this community, this service is here for you, in whatever form you find us. If you want to follow along with a written order of service, you can find that link just below this video on our website. And if you want to chat with your fellow UUCUC members, you can find the live stream chat box on our YouTube page. Remember that because we are live, there's still time to make your own contributions to our shared joys and sorrows later in the service. To do that, just email your message to joysandsorrows@uucuc.org. This congregation chooses to begin every Sunday with a formal acknowledgement of the indigenous nations of this land. It's a practice that connects us to the history of this place and our own responsibilities as stewards and members of a wider community. Wherever you are listening from today, please bring to mind the indigenous peoples and histories of your place. There will be a moment of silence after the acknowledgement. We recognize and acknowledge that we gather today on indigenous land, taken through deception, coercion, and violence. We acknowledge the continued displacement and oppression of indigenous communities and lift up Native commitments to survival, identity, and the protection of this world. Thank you. Now, UUCUC member Michaela Cruz will lead us in our chalice lighting.
We light this chalice, symbol of our Unitarian Universalist tradition, to mark out this time together as special and worthy. If you have a chalice or candle at home, we invite you to join us in lighting it and speaking these shared words as printed on your screen and in your order of service. As we kindle this flame, we reignite our commitment to our congregational mission to build community, seek inspiration, promote justice, and find peace. Come, let us spend this time together.
Lord.
Thank you, Jerry and Tim, for that adorable story. Each Sunday here at UUCUC, we make space to share the joys and sorrows closest to our hearts. What joys and sorrows do you carry into our time together today? Let them rise to the surface now, and if you wish me to share them aloud, there's still some time to send them in to joysandsorrows@uucuc.org. Together, we are going to sing our blessing song, Long Time Son, and then I will share aloud the joys and sorrows of this community. First, a joy from Marcia Clenard. 3 weeks ago, Charlie Boast had surgery to implant part of a cochlear device with its 16 electrodes. Last Friday, the exterior processor was attached and it was magical. For the first time in 35 years, Charlie was hearing sounds on his left side and his brain quickly responded. It was awesome and much learning and new adventures lie ahead. What joy. A joy and sorrow from Ellen Jacobson. Joy in some hours of virtual time with my grandkids yesterday. Sorrow that I couldn't hug them and that there's such huge chaos in our country. Finally, a sorrow from Reverend Florence. Sorrow for the death of 16-year-old Jerriante J. Brown of Champaign, who was shot and killed Thursday night in Champaign. Sending prayers to his bereaved family and mourning the loss of yet another young person in our community to gun violence. Thank you all for sharing, and know that if your email didn't come through in time, your joy or sorrow will still be included in this week's e-news for the community to see. I invite you to take a breath, lift your hands to your heart, drop your shoulders, and let us hold these joys and sorrows, spoken and unspoken, with love and tenderness, in gratitude and in hope. Gratitude for the joy of recovered senses, the connection across great distance, the support of community, and hope for healing where we need it most, resilience through these difficult, chaotic times, and the meaningful change it will take to prevent future losses to violence. May the love of this community stretch between us and beyond us, and may we always find what it is we need in this space. Amen. And I invite you to please join me in this moment of prayer or meditation. Today's reading comes to us from Alex Capitan, a UU community minister, organizer, educator, and editor. Z is a co-leader of the Transforming Hearts Collective and the founder of the website Radical Copy Editor. Z writes, I want to talk about choice. As a genderqueer person, I've had to quite literally write and speak myself into existence, forcing language to make room for me within a culture that does not want to admit that there are people like me at all. I've made one choice after another to feel more at ease, more vibrant, more alive. So if anyone ever tries to invalidate your identity or your personhood by saying it's just a choice, tell them choice is sacred. Tell them it is the inherent right of every person to have full authority and agency over choices they make about their lives and their bodies. Tell them this is a spiritual and human imperative, that there's a word for this, and it's liberation. That there's nothing more worth fighting for. Tell them that in your faith tradition, we don't love people despite their differences or because they can't help being different. We love people because of their differences and because diversity enriches our world and our communities. Tell them that in any final reckoning, there is only one real choice that can be judged. Tell them you hope they choose love. Here ends our reading. We, as Unitarian Universalists, acknowledge that our circle of care doesn't stop at these four walls. We are deeply connected to the community we find ourselves in and to the wider world. Even as we keep a safe distance, there are countless ways we can find to connect with each other. You're invited to our fellowship hour on Zoom immediately after the service, where you can catch up with all your church friends and talk about what you have planned for the week. At 1 p.m. today, there's an interfaith COVID-safe car rally happening in Champaign to support the counting of every vote and staying involved in election defense until there is a peaceful transfer of power. At 4:30 today, there's a virtual vigil being held in Urbana to honor the National Day of Remembrance for road traffic victims. You can also get involved with our immigration justice efforts, currently looking for volunteers who can provide translation and other support to families who need to find refuge with us. Any other number of other support groups, religious education classes, and justice causes are available to you. Just keep an eye on your weekly e-news email newsletter. Each Sunday, we pass the plate and share our offering with an organization doing the work of justice in the world. During the month of November, our social action offering will support the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, a grant-making nonprofit committed to authentic relationship with grassroots justice movements and the centering of leaders most affected by inequity. You can give by text or through the online portal on our website. Half of your donation will go toward the work of this church, half will go to the UU Service Committee. We invite you to give whatever is generous for you, and know that anything you give will be gratefully received and put to use, helping make real change in the world. The offering will now be taken. We all heard the story of Tango at the beginning of this service. The baby penguin hatched and raised by her two penguin dads at the Central Park Zoo. It's an adorable picture book and a true story, beautifully demonstrating how families can look all types of unexpected ways and still be loving and whole and good. I included it in today's service not just because it's cute and wholesome and fun to read, but also because it is among the top 10 most banned or challenged books in America today. Tango Makes Three was published in 2005, 15 years ago, and has faced endless backlash since then, including demands that it be removed completely from library and bookstore shelves. Its detractors say the story is inappropriate for children. They accuse it of being political indoctrination and lies, despite being a retelling of actual events. By demanding the book be removed or hidden or moved to the adult section, these challengers hope to protect young eyes from ever having to see such dangerous and explicit LGBTQ content, like the explicit illustrations of two boy penguins bowing to each other or building a nest. And this book is far from alone in being challenged and banned on these grounds. Many books, particularly children's books, are being actively targeted for including facts about sexuality, identity, and the natural diversity of our world. You see, obscenity is a category that isn't fully protected under the First Amendment. So if you can classify something as obscene, as inappropriate, dangerous, you can make the case for getting rid of it, or at least making it inaccessible to its intended audience. I hope that you all can immediately see how easily this might slide into something very dark. If you simply label an idea, a fact, a person as inherently obscene, then you've taken the first step toward erasing it entirely. So we read this particular book today because I believe when our basic values of love and equality are called inappropriate, we as Unitarian Universalists and as people of principle have an obligation to be loudly and proudly as inappropriate as we need to be. When Tango and her two penguin dads are labeled obscene, we really have no choice but to make obscenity a part of our spiritual practice. No choice but to preach obscenity from the pulpit, to ring it out from the bell tower. So if you tuned in today, seeing the title of this sermon and hoping you might see one of your ministers dropping F-bombs, I'm sorry to disappoint. Today's practice of obscenity is about far more than language and goes much deeper than shock value. The history of anti-obscenity crusades is one that encompasses more than you might think, and it's one I find myself reflecting on more and more in the context of our particular political moment. Electoral politics aside, the face of our nation's Supreme Court has changed dramatically in the past years. And precedents that have protected our rights in the past are suddenly feeling a bit less certain. It isn't hard to conjure dystopian visions of what our lives might look like if Roe or Obergefell were to be overturned. If we, as UUs, maintain our principles of autonomy, choice, equality, we may find ourselves on the wrong side of the law at some point in the future. If our patchwork of states are indeed set loose to make all the regressive, restrictive laws they want, what might those laws end up looking like? And what will we be able to do about it? Luckily, we're not the first to be confronted with such a question. We've been here before, lived with those who would suppress and erase us before, and the past holds a great deal of wisdom if we care to look for it. The USA has a long history of using accusations of obscenity as one tool among many to suppress dissent, declaring huge swaths of human experience to be outside the bounds of polite society, inappropriate for discussion, better left unsaid and unwritten. You see, one way of preventing people from breaking the rules you set is to prevent them from even talking about breaking the rules, prevent them from writing books about it, exchanging information, and forming communities. I'm talking about anti-LGBTQ censorship, as in the case of Tango and her dads today, but I'm also talking about a great deal more. Did you know, for example, it used to be a jailable offense to talk about birth control? It's true, and there's more. It used to be against the law to provide any basic scientific sex ed, especially to unmarried people, and especially if that sex ed covered anything other than strict one man, one woman married to each other arrangements. It was illegal to reference the existence of condoms in public. Americans were even for a time forbidden to mention any sexual content or information in the personal letters they sent through the U.S. Postal Service. Personal, private letters. This was all thanks to a jumble of state and federal restrictions called the Comstock Laws, which existed for decades, starting in the 1870s, to protect the American people from obscenity. The laws were named for Anthony Comstock, who was a United States postal inspector and founder of the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice. Over 3,600 people were prosecuted under these laws. In the name of protecting American morals, anatomy books were confiscated from the mailboxes of medical students. Disseminating information on how to prevent pregnancy was punishable by up to 5 years hard labor. During World War I, U.S. servicemen were the only members of the Allied forces sent overseas without condoms. The anti-obscenity worldview was one that held real sway in the halls of power and had real consequences, despite our claims to cherish freedom of speech. The official seal of the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice proudly displayed the image of a book burning. A dapper man in a top hat tossing piles of books into the flames. Enforcers of the Comstock Laws bragged about having destroyed over 160 tons of, quote, obscene literature. It's hard to imagine Tango Makes Three would have escaped those flames. These obscenity laws went largely unchallenged until the rise of the birth control movement in the 19-teens and 20s. But just as Comstock's laws began to unravel, a new set of restrictive censorship standards grew up in their place. In 1930, the Haze Code was born, a set of guidelines dictating what information could be included in mainstream American media, an industry that was exploding into prominence in the mid-20th century. The Haze Code, named for President of the Motion Picture Distributors of America at the time, William Haze, forbid the depiction or on-screen discussion of sex hygiene, abortion, miscegenation, aka mixed-race relationships, or, quote, any inference of sex perversion, a phrase which refers to the mere implied existence of anyone who is not 100% straight. Our penguin dads, Silo and Roy, sex perversion under the Haze Code. And these media restrictions remained in place to various degrees until the 1960s, which is also when the last of the Comstock-era anti-contraceptive laws began to be struck down by the Supreme Court. The 1960s may feel like a long time ago to some of you. For others, it might feel less distant, but it is certainly within the living memory of many of those who currently hold power in our nation. So why spend so much time revisiting this depressing chapter of American history, this litany of repression and censorship, book burnings and bigotry? because those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. And unfortunately, labeling something obscene is still a powerful way to silence and erase those whose very existence threatens a certain worldview. But there's still good news. Isn't that the role of church, to share the good news? Well, the good news is that none of these restrictions ever fully succeeded in what they set out to do. Comstock and Haze and everyone like them could burn as many books as they could find, but they never destroyed the fundamental values those books represented. Never once in all our history has LGBTQ identity ceased to exist. Never once has knowledge of sexual health been completely eradicated. People still found ways to the truth, even under Comstock. Still found ways to prevent or terminate unwanted pregnancies, still found ways to pass information under the noses of the censors who would silence them. For every repressive obscenity law, there were underground communities fighting back, thriving against all odds at the fringes of society and doing what they could to bring the rest of us along. There were queer artists telling their stories in coded language on the silver screen, and generations of LGBTQ folk building families outside the legal restrictions set around marriage. There were suffragists risking jail time in order to teach their children about contraception, hiding messages to other women in need in the advertisements of penny newspapers. Closer to our end of the century, there were networks of nurses and progressive clergy helping women access needed abortions and bringing comfort to gay men during the AIDS epidemic. And yes, there were Unitarians, Universalists, and eventually Unitarian Universalists in the trenches of each of these efforts, following the call of our faith to seek truth and practice love. These many and varied communities believed in the fundamental truth of our equal human dignity, our right to knowledge, autonomy, and care. And they kept that truth alive, even as powerful forces tried to silence and erase them. This history teaches us that humanity, truth, is irrepressible. And it shows us the map we might follow to create our own underground networks, should the need arise. Which brings us to OWL. OWL, standing for Our Whole Lives. The uniquely Unitarian Universalist response to a culture that has tried so hard and for so long to repress and silence that which has been labeled obscene. Our Whole Lives is a comprehensive sex ed curriculum designed in tandem by the UUs and the United Church of Christ. Originally called About Your Sexuality, the Our Whole Lives program has existed within UU churches for almost 50 years. It's comprehensive not just in that it includes accurate and age-appropriate scientific information, but in that it also tries to help students clarify their own values around sex, build interpersonal skills, and understand the spiritual, emotional, and social aspects of their sexuality. The program was dreamed into being as a direct challenge to the moralistic, anti-obscenity spirit that has for so long haunted American culture. You see, because it is a church program, it's protected somewhat under the umbrella of religious freedom, which has allowed OWL to exist even in regions where popular sentiment is less accepting of its comprehensive approach. Many churches even open up their classes to kids from outside the congregation, doing everything they can to bring real sex ed to the whole community. There are OWL curricula for all ages, kindergarten through adulthood. And now even a brand new curriculum designed specifically for elders. Each lesson is rooted in the belief that sexual knowledge and well-being is as sacred, as worthy as any other facet of the human experience. When I was enrolled in OWL as a UU teen, abstinence only was the dominant form of sex ed in America. In the health classroom of my mid-Missouri public school, there was no mention of LGBTQ identity or even the existence of trans people. Birth control, condoms, and treatment for sexually transmitted diseases were mentioned mainly to emphasize how unreliable they were. And I don't remember the word abortion being used at all. Basic truths about human bodies, minds, and hearts were hidden away. Textbook chapters skipped over entirely, deemed not appropriate for the classroom, dangerous to read or hear. Ignorance, school taught me, was bliss. But we know that ignorance is not bliss. We, as Unitarian Universalists, believe in the free and responsible search for truth, the fourth principle of our 7. And my memories of the OWL classroom at my mid-sized UU church shine in contrast to the fear and shame-based education promoted at school. At church, I learned about consent, safer sex, abortion, IUDs, gender identity, and the whole LGBTQ spectrum, not as separate and unrelated political causes, but as part of one sacred whole. The miracle of the human body, the importance of autonomy and individual choice, the beauty of diversity, the joy of self-expression and being embraced by community. It was all connected, and all connected to me. And because we are all connected, our defense of each other's rights must all be connected as well. And at the same time, I saw people from the outside world labeling this education as obscene, perverse, inappropriate. Saw people fighting to keep similar messages out of our schools, out of our libraries, away from young eyes like mine. So yes, I believe there's a chance, given our nation's political realities, that we might see new precedents set and renewed efforts to strike out against scientific fact, LGBTQ identity, and reproductive health care all at once, with the convenient and time-tested label, obscenity. But I also believe that we have exactly the tools we need to fight back. This congregation right here has been offering OWL to our young people for over 20 years, possibly longer. And there are ambitious plans being made to expand the program to all ages once we're able to gather in person again. This congregation, this faith tradition, has been standing against the exclusion and suppression of our fellow humans for longer than I've been alive, and it will continue to do so long after I'm gone. So if love is declared obscene, if bodily autonomy is deemed inappropriate, if the basic scientific facts of our diversity of bodies and minds are excluded from public conversation, what will we do? We will preach that obscenity proudly. We will read banned books from the pulpit. We will offer that truth to all who need it, provide networks of knowledge and community and access. And we will carry the story of our loving and sacred obscenity one more generation down the line. Amen. And now, I invite you to join in singing from home, or simply let the music wash over you, as we hear hymn number 325, Love Makes a Bridge.
Love makes a bridge from heart to heart and hand to hand. Love finds a way when laws are blind and freedom banned. Love breaks the walls of language, gender, class, and age. Love gives us wings to split the bars of every cage. Love lifts the hopes that force and fear have beaten down. Love breaks the chains and gives us strength to stand our ground. Love rings the bells of wanted birth and wedding day. Love guides the hands that promise more than words can say. Love makes a bridge that winds may shake yet not destroy. Love carries faith through life and death to endless joy.
As we move into the coming week, may we be joyfully, unapologetically human, with all our human inappropriateness, our human bodies, our human loves. May we always have the freedom to make the choices that are right for us, to seek the knowledge we need, and to build the families we dream of. May we remember there is a word for this, and it's liberation, and that there's nothing more worth fighting for. May we learn from the past, and no matter our future, may we continue to build community, seek inspiration, promote justice, and find peace. Amen.
We extinguish our chalice with these shared words written by Unitarian Universalist minister Reverend Elizabeth Selly Jones. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.